In the dead of a June night in 1976, in the quiet suburb of Carmichael, California, a man crept into a home on La Alegre Drive. He moved with a predator's silence, first to a bedroom where a teenage boy slept. He placed a flashlight beam on the boy's face, then struck him in the head with a heavy pipe. The intruder then bound him and proceeded to the master bedroom, where he repeated the violence on the boy's father before turning to the mother. For hours, he subjected her to repeated sexual assault. Before leaving, he ransacked the house, ate food from the kitchen, and stole petty cash. He vanished, leaving a family shattered and a community about to learn a terrifying new word: ransacking. This was not his first visit. It would not be his last. Who was this phantom who invaded the sacred space of the home? And what incomprehensible rage drove him to return to the same houses and the same victims again and again? The California of the mid-1970s was the backdrop for a new kind of American fear. This was the era of the serial killer, with the names Bundy, Gacy, and the son of Sam soon to dominate headlines. Yet in the burgeoning, seemingly idyllic suburbs of Sacramento, Orange County, and the San Francisco Bay Area, a different terror took root. One that violated the core post-war promise of safety behind one's own door. These were communities built on sunshine and privacy, with sliding glass doors, expansive windows, and unlocked patio entries offering easy access. Law enforcement, meanwhile, was fractured. Dozens of independent city and county departments had no centralized system for sharing information. A series of attacks in Sacramento might as well have occurred on another planet from those in Contra Costa County. Forensic technology was rudimentary, but blood type could be determined, but DNA profiling was 2 decades away. Fingerprint matching required manual card sorting. The concept of psychological profiling was in its infancy at the FBI Academy in Quantico. This was a predator's perfect environment, a landscape of trusting, isolated victims, investigated by separated agencies with limited tools, all while he evolved his methods with chilling precision. The victims were as varied as the neighborhoods he struck, united only by their horrific misfortune. They were couples, both young and middle-aged, and single women. They were people like Brian and Katie Maggiore, a young airman and his wife, shot to death in 1978 while walking their dog in Rancho Cordova, an attack later linked to him. They were people like Charlene and Lemon Smith, the brutally bludgeoned with a log from their own fireplace in Ventura County in 1980. They were women like Janelle Cruz, a teenager murdered in her Irvine home in 1986, the last known attack. But the terror was uniquely personalized for those he called the ones I hate. He would often return to a victim's home weeks, months, or even years after an initial assault. Survivors would find items rearranged, mementos stolen, and evidence that he had been inside while they were away, taunting them with his presence and total control. His focus was not just murder. It was a campaign of psychological obliteration, ensuring survivors could never again feel safe in their own skin or their own homes. The event pattern reconstructed from survivor accounts and crime scenes, reveals a methodical and evolving monster. His early attacks in Northern California, beginning in 1974 around the Sacramento area, often involved couples. He would disable porch lights, cut phone lines, and enter through unlocked doors or windows. Armed with a knife or a blunt object, he would bind the male victim and place dishes or towels on his back, warning that, if he heard them fall, he would kill everyone. He would then assault the female victim for hours in the same room. He was verbose, often spewing bizarre, hate-filled rants. He would take trivial souvenirs, coins, jewelry, ID cards. After the attacks in Sacramento peaked, a similar pattern emerged in the East Bay Area in 1978. Then, after the murder of the Maggiores, he went silent in the North. In 1979, the horror resurfaced in Southern California. The method changed. The attacks became exclusively homicidal, far more brutal, and almost always involving bludgeoning. The verbose rapist was now a silent, efficient killer who left few witnesses alive. The discovery of his crimes was a slow, painful puzzle assembled across jurisdictions. Local police responded to each attack as an isolated horror. In Sacramento, the series was dubbed the East Area Rapist. In Goleta, where a couple was murdered in 1979, it was the original Night Stalker, a name chosen to distinguish him from the media dubbed Night Stalker. Richard Ramirez, who came later. For years, there was no definitive link. The connection was made not by a central computer, but by the obsessive work of a few detectives like Sacramento County's Carol Daly and Larry Poole, who manually compared case files. They noticed the eerie, signature behaviors, the dishes on the back, the ransacking for souvenirs, the pre-attack surveillance. In 2001, DNA evidence conclusively linked the rapes in the North to the murders in the South, proving a single offender was responsible for at least 50 sexual assaults and 13 murders across California. The public discovery was not a single moment, but a dawning, horrific realization that a single predator had been crisscrossing the state for over a decade. The initial investigations, conducted in silos, were overwhelmed. In Sacramento, a massive task force formed, leading to the controversial detention and public suspicion of an innocent man. Police organized community meetings that filled school gymnasiums, spreading both awareness and panic. Citizens formed armed neighborhood patrols, gun sales soared. Detectives pursued thousands of tips, from the plausible to the outlandish. One promising lead was a young man seen canvassing neighborhoods and later identified. He was cleared. The killer seemed to anticipate police moves, sometimes striking in an area immediately after a public community meeting, as if taunting the effort. In Southern California, where the crimes were homicides, investigations were no less frantic, but faced a dead end: no witnesses, no clear motive, and a suspect who left almost no physical evidence beyond the seminal fluid that would one day be his undoing. The primary tool was shoe leather and dogged persistence, chasing down every stolen item or similar crime report. The building a profile of a suspect who was a skilled peeper, a proficient climber, and intimately familiar with residential construction and police procedures. The public and media reaction evolved with the crimes. In Sacramento in the late 1970s, the East Area Rapist was a local terror. The Sacramento Bee ran headlines like, "Police link 20 attacks to East Side Rapist." The community lived under self-imposed curfew, with husbands sleeping with baseball bats and families installing expensive alarm systems. When the attacks seemed to stop, the fear slowly subsided into an unresolved anxiety. In Southern California, the murders, though horrific, were reported as separate tragedies, not yet connected to the North or to each other. It wasn't until the DNA link was made public in 2001 that the staggering scope of his crime spree entered the national consciousness. True crime writers and online sleuths, particularly on a forum called the East Area Rapist Original Night Stalker board, kept the case alive, compiling timelines and theorizing in the digital shadows long after official investigations had cooled. This grassroots effort was instrumental in maintaining pressure and interest. The evidence he left behind was a maddening mix of the prolific and the elusive. His genetic signature, recovered from multiple scenes, was his most definitive marker, yet for decades it pointed to no one in any criminal database. He left unique shoe prints from military-style Avia sneakers. He used diamond-patterned cord from the same source to bind victims. He took class rings, souvenir coins, and driver's licenses. At one scene, he left a handwritten poem of violent, misogynistic rage. Critically, he seemed to know when to adapt. After a survivor in Contra Costa County managed to free herself and call police while he was still in the house, he never again used that particular binding method. He learned from his near captures. The evidence painted a picture of a highly organized, intelligent offender who planned meticulously, controlled the environment utterly, and was driven by a complex mix of sexual compulsion, rage, and a desire for total domination. For over 40 years, the list of suspects was a graveyard of dead ends. The theories ranged from a disgruntled Vietnam veteran to a former police officer or a security guard. The most compelling profile suggested he was a white male in his teens or early 20s at the start, with some connection to the military or law enforcement, likely lived in or around Sacramento, and had experienced a significant personal trauma around 1974. Thousands of persons of interest were investigated and cleared. The case seemed destined to remain, like the victims of families, in a state of permanent, agonizing suspension. The mystery was not just who, but why. Why the specific hatred for couples? Why the revisits? Why did he start as a rapist and evolve into a killer? What internal trigger made him stop after 1986? The lack of answers was a haunting in itself. The long silence was finally broken not by a detective's deduction, but by a genetic genealogist's algorithm. In 2018, the using DNA from a crime scene uploaded to a public genealogy database, investigators built a family tree that led them to Joseph James D'Angelo, a 72-year-old former police officer living in Citrus Heights, a suburb of Sacramento. His arrest was a seismic event. He had been a police officer in the very town of Exeter during the Visalia Ransacker crimes, also linked to him, and was later an officer in Auburn, California, during the height of the East Area Rapist attacks. He was fired from the Auburn Force in 1979 for shoplifting dog repellent and a hammer, tools of his trade. He then faded into a quiet life as a truck mechanic, a father, and a grandfather. His capture answered the paramount "Who?" But in doing so, it unleashed a torrent of new, unanswerable questions about the man behind the monster. Joseph DeAngelo's 2020 conviction and life sentence brought a measure of justice, but not resolution. In a Sacramento courtroom, facing survivors and victims' families, he offered a raspy, brief apology. "I'm sorry to everyone I've hurt. It was a pathetic coda to a saga of unspeakable cruelty. The legal case is finished. But for historians and true crime scholars, the case of the original Night Stalker remains profoundly unfinished. Why did this particular man, with a stable job and family, become this particular predator? How many more attacks remain undiscovered or unlinked? What was the full meaning of the rituals? The dishes, the souvenirs, the taunting phone calls. His crimes were a meticulously crafted nightmare, a personal horror show for dozens of innocents. We now know the name and face of the author, but the dark, sprawling text of his motivations, the complete map of his atrocities, and the deep psychological why may forever remain locked inside the mind of an old man in a prison cell. The final, silent vault of one of America's most terrifying mysteries.